Welcome to Business Talk, the show that brings you insights and discussions with South Africa's captains of industry. Now, I think it's fair to say the mood in South Africa can best be described as pessimistic from the conversations I have with ordinary South Africans around the braai. And I think given the ongoing electricity and transport crises, our ham-fisted, non-aligned diplomacy and the creaking rule of law with stories of extortion rackets and mafia seemingly creeping into all sectors, it's not surprising. But I'm reminded of what historian Xavier de Toit used to say about South Africa, that it progresses through economic windfall and political disaster. Now, someone who thinks very deeply about where South Africa finds itself, because ultimately it impacts the firm that he leads and the client's funds entrusted to his firm to manage, is Hendrik du Toit, the CEO of 91, one of South Africa's leading investment management firms. Hendrik, always a pleasure chatting to you. Thanks for being here. And let's just dive into where you see South Africa at the moment, because the investment markets have faced numerous challenges since COVID. We've got load shedding, we've got a weak business and consumer confidence out there. How do you view the current investment landscape in the country?
Michael, I'm not going to bore you with all the bad news, because we all know the bad news. We know that South Africa is on the, and South Africa has many times in my life been on the brink. I reminded a bunch of young people joining our firm this morning that our name 91 comes from the year 1991, when we started out and set up as a business. That between 91 and 93 there was massive uncertainty, there was violence in the streets, but there was the hope of a political settlement between Mandela and de Klerk. There was a hope of a consensus being formed, and South Africans from many walks of life stood up and ultimately brought the country back from the brink. I still vividly remember those photographs. I was in an election queue myself in 1994. That really changed the game for probably 15 years, until we had the corrosion of the Zuma administration. So today what we face is deeply entrenched corruption, incompetence, and challenges that make us truly uncompetitive, which reflects in our very high unemployment and societal stress. So I would say South Africa has been on the brink many times. Go back in the history, you refer to, de Toit. If you go and read, just think of what we did to ourselves in the various wars we had. But we have to admit that we have a mountain to climb on the economic side, and we should not talk about a state of disaster. We should talk about an economic emergency, but it is not impossible to fix.
I think a great introductory remark. And what we see, certainly from what I'm seeing, is the power of the private sector just on the energy front. If you look at ever since that 100 megawatt cap was raised and then done away with, we now have at NERSA over 1,000 projects totaling somewhere around 4,700 megawatts. I mean, that's the equivalent of one Medupi or Kusile by the private sector, which we know will apply all of that discipline to make sure that this power comes on time and on budget, which I guess leads us to our next question. How do you then anticipate this investment landscape changing over the next few years? Do you see it improving or worsening?
You see, if I look at the markets, let me start with what I know. I understand markets. The markets are pricing essentially zero growth economy. The markets are, if you look at just the price at which government borrows for 15 years, it pays 12, inflation is 6 real. So you just lock your money away and you do pretty okay if you assume government is not going to go bankrupt. And South African equities, South African companies are very cheap by international standards. Our currency has gone down quite substantially. I mean, just when I was born, 100 rand. If someone gave my mother for me 100 rand when I was born in, then today it would be worth 10,000 rand. So we've had inflation of kind of average of 7 to 8% ever since. We're now at 6. So the macro situation prices in no growth. It doesn't price in true social disaster. Okay? But I don't think South Africa is going to get there. What we must change that to is to price in hope and growth. what we've seen from the private sector now in a hesitant relaxation of the limits. It still takes long to do the paperwork. Minister Matash's department is still in the way. There are other things that are there. But I am hopeful that an ANC government, which is under pressure at the ballot box now, not for ideological reasons, but for delivering to people, is going to become more action oriented. I think that the president has opened the batting by resisting lots of these sort of bad ways of the Zuma era, but not quite completing the job. I sense a very decisive deputy president who understands that he is going to become president in an essentially ungovernable country if he doesn't start acting. That gives me hope. And I think we've seen a private sector which has moved away from criticizing, standing on the sideline, sort of waiting for an accommodative government to now just starting doing. I always quote the example of Adrian Gore's leadership at Discovery. They're fixing potholes in Johannesburg.
Yeah.
I wouldn't believe there would be potholes in Johannesburg 20 years ago, but I can tell you outside London and even in the streets of London, there are potholes, but Discovery is just fixing it. Farmers are fixing area. They are working with unemployed workers. There's a movement in South Africa starting now of action and of intolerance to incompetence by the state. And I think the state is going to feel it. And the citizenry is more powerful than the state in a country like ours. And good politicians will smell that. And they will understand short-term, small-minded gains against other parties. And that is not what the South African electorate wants now and the South African community at large. So I can see us moving from a 0 to a 1 to 2% growth rate. I cannot see us at this stage without major structural reform move to a north of 3% growth rate in a world which is quite tough. We should remember the world is not that accommodative to South Africa or to what we do even, because we need high growth, we need lots of people to travel, we need risk capital wanting to come to places which they could otherwise avoid. And we've seen South Africa is easy to bypass. We are not an essential economy to the world. So I think we've got to have a debate, get our act together, talk straight, and stop. And so the sad thing, Michael, if I may just make 2 more points. I mean, we're shooting ourselves. I was yesterday explaining it to a leader in the South African government. I said, why the hell do we shoot ourselves, not just in the foot, but in the head? Come in with water restrictions on agriculture when farmers are already nervous to invest because of land security. You know, this is this nonsense, racially based stuff 30 years after we've abolished apartheid. Yes, we should be inclusive and supportive of the poor, but you can't make silly rules from the center. The other one that was just, really going to hit us is the progression in the transformation requirements of all businesses. Now, we're all busy transforming. We've all brought in lots of people. We're doing okay. But if you're going to lead it, raise the bar to a point where it becomes impossible to comply, you are just going to destroy what you want to, your objective, which is jobs for South Africans and inclusive growth. So we've got to go back to basics. And I think it's time to talk straight.
I think a very important point that you raise, and on the the draft EE regulations, I was chatting to Moletsi and Becky about this the other day, and he said, Michael, well, just have a look at the Pearls report. Look at the fact that, only 2 out of 10 South African grade 4 learners can read for meaning. And then you've got a government that wants to drive greater levels of transformation in the labor force, but it is not fulfilling its part of the social contract through public education to deliver the skills that business requires in order to deepen its pull and to speed up transformation. And I think increasingly, to your point, we're seeing business leaders stand up. And I loved your point there. It reminded me of what Rassie Erasmus said before we won the World Cup in Japan. South Africans have superior discontent. And I think South Africans of all walks, races, creeds, and even ideological persuasions are displaying that discontent with incompetence and the looting, and in particular, the kind of decline in the rule of law. Just given the outlook that you've described, though, what strategies would you recommend for investors to navigate what is still a very challenging environment. We're starting to have the conversations, but there's still lots to get done.
Can I just split my answer in two? They're corporate investors or business people, and I would have a different answer. And then the general investor, i.e. the clients of 91 and the clients of firms like 91. So I think businesses mustn't sit on their hands. You are doomed if you just sit on your hands anyway. You've got to look at the opportunities. And I was recently at a meeting, mid-sized. This is not the kind of business we invest. These are private companies run by battle-hardened entrepreneurs. They're not that large. And I was listening how they asked for some input, but I learned a lot more than I could teach them. And I was seeing how they were pivoting their businesses to opportunity, from providing technology for home power supply to building trailers which meet the failure of Transnet to supply mining transport means for mining output to the harbors. People who inventing systems for the ports, just looking at critical minerals that South Africa may have that could be really important in the technology transition, greening buildings. I mean, there are so many opportunities when you have a large economy with big sectors, and particularly the state, vacating it. The state is not vacating it ideologically, but it's vacating it through failure. Just think of the security industry that has arisen. So there are enormous opportunities every day, even in a place like South Africa. And I think businesses must always remember that. And thank God we have a relatively stable macroeconomic environment. We're not dealing with hyperinflation or anything like that. So we have some pluses. So on the business side, I think one should be making plans, not sitting on your hands, because it doesn't help to sit on your hands. The second part of the answer is for the wider investor. I would really firstly make sure in a tough economy like this, don't overstretch on the consumption side. Don't, overgear yourself, but get your money into markets where there is a real return. So at home, fixed income assets now provide a real return in your retirement portfolio. Take that opportunity while the market is pricing essentially a failure in government's growth strategy. On the other hand, on the equity side, I would say deep value could be a trap, but there's a lot of value in the market. But we strongly believe you should stick with companies that have navigated through rougher times than this locally and globally. So quality equities just make sense, which you can sleep. They're paying you dividends in dollars between 3 and 6%. And you stick with companies that can navigate and can win big in a world with rapid change, whether it's AI, whether it's political, macro change, etc., and move a substantial, but not all your assets internationally. Use the freedoms. Government's given you freedom. Use it. Diversify your portfolio, but don't get stuck on single assets, single projects, single get-rich schemes. That's always... I always appreciated when it was Johan Rupert who said there are only two kinds of funds. There's a get-rich fund and a stay-rich fund. And typically the get-rich entrepreneurial risk, which is really difficult and often fails. And if you stay-rich, keep your money in real terms, you will retire well. But the options are here. South Africa has a vibrant industry, good advisors. Go to your financial advisor, talk about it, get something that is appropriate for you. But I think in the near term, markets are not going to give you a huge amount. That become very narrow, driven by a few tech stocks, which are extremely expensive, and where governments are probably going to interfere from a regulatory point of view to level the playing fields. So the next few months, don't expect huge returns, but don't stop investing, because you'll miss the good times when they come, and then you'll chase it afterwards. Continue to invest, live modestly, and there are real returns to be had right now in this market, just don't be depressed and sit on rand cash, because that's a sure loser.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you just look at the RSA retail savings bond at 11.75%, call it 12%, 6% real on inflation of 6. I mean, that's, unless you believe the South African state is absolutely going to become South Sudan, it really is attractive. And to your point on valuations and value traps, I mean, I was having a look at a Tiger Brands, for example, company with rich assets, heritage brands, trading on a book price to book of 1.5 times. It's never been so cheap. And again, there seems to be this peak level of pessimism, which quite frankly isn't really borne out by the dispassionate view. Now, let's talk about how we actually improve the investment environment. And it was interesting. We're having this conversation today at a time when the Centre for Development and Enterprise and Bernstein just released a comprehensive paper saying that the government's policies are effectively anti-growth. So what do you believe are the key factors that need to be addressed in South Africa to make us an attractive environment for that risk-seeking, return-seeking capital? And capital can discriminate, but never unfairly. How do we make ourselves attractive for that kind of investment?
And I think important, Michael, capital is always hungry for opportunities. There is a complex, messy world. Capital looks for the potential rather than the current success. And capital is always willing to take a bet on potential, which means you've got to present yourselves well. Now, that doesn't mean don't talk porkish to the foreigners about South Africa. It means being honest, because they're not stupid. They get the same information we get. But I think it's very important. There are 4 things I would say. Firstly, coherence in government. You cannot have ministries being empires of individuals. Whoever's on top of government, the president, deputy president, the cabinet, need to pull people in line and say, this is our 3-point or 4-point plan, and everyone sticks to that plan, and you can't run your little department differently. Okay, that's the first coherence in government. Coherence to do what? Firstly, to deliver the basic duties of government, which is safety and security, health and well-being, including in water supply, electricity supply, all the basic infrastructures for people to be productive, and then get the public education right. That is a long-term project, but the commitment to public education and to excellent public education should be made. And so firstly, avoid the unforced errors, of which there are so many, and then start thinking about the long-term potential, and then talk about it, socialize it, so that people in South Africa can start believing that they will have a better tomorrow, or that they will have a better life than their parents or their incumbents currently having. Once you get that belief in a society, it's quite interesting. Right now in Europe, but particularly the UK, there is a negative assumption about the future relative to what the previous generation had. That itself becomes debilitating for enterprise, for growth, for the willingness of the society to risk itself. And let me give you an example. There's an economy that was pretty much oil dependent, worried about the future, was a pretty old, I shouldn't call it old, but a gerontocracy running it. And then a young man was by his father promoted, probably some people say over promoted. And he made mistakes. He made bad mistakes. But what Mohammed bin Salman is achieving in Saudi Arabia at the moment, with a unleashing participation of women in the labor market, modernizing the economy, and taking, importantly, bets, government capital. They've just done it with golf. They just reshaped France.
The PGA deal.
They are using their money to reshape their environment. They're incredibly bold with their Vision 2030, but they're not just bold. They're actually executing. They're paying for good people to do the work. They're driving standards in that economy. It feels, we had a team there last week and the week before. The reports are, I haven't been there since COVID, I'm going late in the year. The reports are, this is Shanghai 1997. Again, when a society develops a consensus, aligns behind whatever kind of leadership, whether it's coalition, whether it's, and no leadership can be, unless it wants to be North Korea, or Zimbabwe can operate against the will of its people. Definitely not in South Africa. No one has the will. The military is too weak. The police is too incompetent. No state can operate against the will of the citizenry. But if it marshals the citizenry, as Saudi Arabia has done, and it takes its considerable resources and bets, essentially by building new cities, by doing things, they are betting the farm. But the result is a 10% growth economy, which now attracts foreign capital from all over the world, which is suddenly creating a regional spark. The whole region is lifting its game, and the consequence is it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So going back to Rassie Erasmus and his box, they were playing pretty badly the year before the World Cup. When they left for Japan, every single person in that squad had a belief that they could achieve the final goal. They were committed, they were clear, and they never stopped believing. And so I would say the final thing, you asked me the points, I gave you the sort of general points, is engendering a sense of belief. And that starts with small actions, small improvement. It starts with celebrating what Jordan Hill-Lewis is doing in Cape Town, not playing small politics and say, well, the Western Cape is there. Look at what they do and actually apply it. Go and learn from Rwanda. See what they've done to their economy. Go and look at other places and not play, small politics. And I think we can get the average South African to pressurize his or her leadership, whichever party it is, to achieve that. So I don't think it's impossible.
Hendrik, if you ever throw your hat in the political ring, I think you'll find more than a few South Africans supporting exactly that kind of message at this stage. And interesting that confidence it's the cheapest form of stimulus. So get those few things going for you and going right. And it's amazing how quickly that can feed in and create a virtuous cycle. Thanks so much for sharing your insights here on Business Talk. Always a great pleasure chatting to you. Hendrik du Toit, CEO of 91.
Michael, thank you very much.